future care, putting the next generations first. So permaculture. Permaculture is regarded as a design system or a framework for creating sustainable, regenerative farms, gardens, communities. But what distinguishes it from any other holistic approach to design is its ethics. And as you all know, we've learnt that the ethics are earth care, people care, and a variety of limits to growth, fair shares, and redistribution of surplus. Around 2017, I was thinking a lot about the coming generations, the unborn, and how, as permaculturists, we needed to embrace the future as well as the present, with knowledge of the past and understanding of how our past got us into the predicament that we're in today, and how that predicament will impact future generations. In 2014, Starhawk began speaking about future care as a third ethic, and she in turn had received this concept from the African Permaculture School. I myself was looking at all sorts of different approaches, and with great respect to the indigenous worldview. And as you know, Bill Mollison was very schooled in Aboriginal culture, travelled all over the world, and I believe that permaculture design is deeply, deeply steeped in the indigenous worldview. Our systems of forestry, agroforestry, agroecology, forest gardening all come from traditional and indigenous cultures, but typically perhaps of Western culture, we haven't fully honoured, respected and attributed the origin of permaculture thinking and doing, being a return to those much more sustainable, naturalised systems of traditional cultures. So I got to thinking about future care, and what if future care could integrate limits to growth, redistribution of surplus and fair shares, and take account of what we design, not just for ourselves and the next generation, but the next generations to come. And this led me to the Iroquois nation's law of 7 generational thinking. So I really want to provenance and honour that this is a Native American teaching and very much steeped in indigenous worldview. So what is it? Well, it is that the needs of the next 7 generations must be taken into account in anything that we do. We have the benefit, for better or for worse, of our ancestry, of the 7 generations that have gone before us. We stand in the present, and we are determiners of the future. We determine the future by our choices, and that determination should be in respect to the next 7 generations. And by that, in Iroquois law, this is about 140 years. So I like to see it as between 140 200 years of practice and design. So decisions need to be made to benefit those timescales. We can't make decisions based on today. So what kind of examples exist already? Well, I've already mentioned our practices in permaculture of no dig, of agroecology, of farming with trees as well as annual crops, agroforestry, all the soil building practices that we promote and practice ourselves. These are very much about future care. Also thinking about how we manage traditional woodlands. In the UK, very much traditionally, the forester would plant not for the next 40 years but for the next 200 years plus. So planting hardwoods for their veneers and for their construction timber and timbers for furniture, hardwoods that the forester or his children would never see. And I experienced an example of this at Ben Law's Prickly Nut Wood in West Sussex, where he is not only coppicing sweet chestnut on 7 to 10 year rotations, he's also planting and thinning forest and looking at producing tree crops well into a 200-year time span, beyond the life of his grandchildren. Very much future care, very much about 7 generational thinking. So this is very much about fair shares, but fair shares in return to future casting. This is very much about making decisions, but making decisions based on redistribution of surplus, not only in the present day, but in future years to come. This is very much about limits to growth and the recognition that we live on a finite planet and that our finite planet cannot possibly survive and continue as it is. We're seeing that it is rapidly degenerating. And so our decisions need to be based on the degeneration as well as promoting regeneration. And we, sitting in the present at this fulcrum point from the past and the future, needs to make these decisions based on 7 generational principles. So that got me to imagine that obviously we're not just talking about the well-being of our children and our children's children and our grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren and so on. We're talking about the well-being of all species. That earth care is not just about caring for the earth, and people care is not just about caring for people, because in traditional indigenous worldviews, of course, people are far more than human. We have all the more than human species on this planet who are deeply sentient and conscious and deserve our honouring and respect and our abilities to conserve. So I got to thinking about how about we develop in every government something called a ministry for the future, so that when there's any legislation in government or intergovernmentally, it takes into account the future and what is going to happen in the future in the next 200 years, and not just the next 5 years, not just in the electoral term. And of course the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has tried in its conservative way to factor in the future, what's going to happen to sea levels by 2030, where do we need to be in terms of zero carbon by then if we're going to stop the warming of the planet and climate chaos, where are we going to be by 2050? And we know that it's not an exact science. The Earth is a complex, incredible system of feedback loops, and it's very difficult for us to concretely predict the future, particularly in relationship to all the climate factors. but we do know that we're entering a phase of climate chaos, and it may not deeply affect the rest of my life, but it will affect my children and my grandchildren and so forth. So I have a deep passion and commitment to the next generations, the unborn. There's a very beautiful teaching that comes from Jamie Sams about the child of tomorrow, Wataji. And it's about a clan mother who meets this spirit child, but she can never see her. She can only feel her on the cradle board of her back. And so as she's walking, she needs to sense the weight of the child of tomorrow, smell the beautiful smell of the child's hair, feel the rhythm of the child and walk in rhythm with that child. Although she'll never see her face, she feels the weight of her on her back. And that's really where we need to go as human beings. We need to be walking with the weight of the next generations on our back and in all our decision making. And that's why I have been so drawn to this idea of future care. Not because I want to throw away the radical implications of fair shares. I want to emphasise them. Not because I don't feel that it's important to redistribute surplus. I feel it's incredibly important that we have that fairness in our societies. And not that I don't want to see the limits to growth. We have to begin somehow, within all the corruption of our political systems, to find a way to limit this monstrous industrial growth model that is consuming us and the planet with forms of thinking and doing like donut economics. So I'm not discarding any of those values. I'm just wishing to enhance them with the really deep personal connection that we can all achieve by feeling the weight of the children of tomorrow on our backs. And this mustn't be like an awful burden or a sadness. It must come from a sense of joy of the unborn, of those we are yet to meet, and how beautiful and hopeful they are, and how they too will bring their skills and their brilliance and their beauty to this world. So it's with anticipation that we embrace future care, not with a heavy sense of responsibility and depression of what we've already messed up. As I said before, we are the determiners. We determine the future, and we can only work in our realms of influence, but we do have realms of influence. And so this is very much about the conservation of resources, and I have a really nice story around that. I'm in Somerset temporarily staying with family while we move from our long-term family home west, we hope, to Devon. And at the weekend I went to the Somerset Levels. This is an amazing plateau surrounded by hills, and only decades ago this was all farmed land, but slowly the conservationists have bought up land and allowed it to re-flood as nature intends. And the reed beds have grown, and there've been, there are pond systems and places where fish can breed, and birds wade, and predatory birds fly and hunt. And it's become an incredibly rich, abundant, biodiverse ecosystem in a matter of years. In 1971 there was one nesting marsh harrier, which is a big bird of prey, living in the British Isles. Just one, not even a pair. So to mate it would go back to its lands in Africa. Today there are 400 nesting pairs, and they're found in East Anglia and Cumbria and the Somerset levels. So they're spreading out across the land as we create new marshy habitats. And I had the joy of watching a pair hunting over the reed beds for a full 15 minutes, and it was an utterly beautiful sight to see this big bird in its habitat once again. First time in my life that I've even seen one. I've seen a hen harrier, but not a marsh harrier. So if you're a birder, you'll understand my joy of seeing this bird. But my joy is also in the fact that some passionate people thought it's not good enough to lose the marsh harrier. The marsh harrier was lost by loss of habitat, by poisoning, by a form of agriculture that drained all the wetlands and took it away, and by DDT as well. And just by some interaction and intervention, this bird was restored to the landscape and is now thriving. And there are many more stories of birds like that, like the buzzard and the red kite in our land. So this, and by reintroducing wetland, we allow there to be places in nature that are sponges, which is vital as we have greater precipitation, more rains, more snow, more wet because of climate chaos. We're going to get more flooding. So we need these places which can absorb some of this water, and to ensure that the places that we live in are not washed away. So this kind of conservation practice is not only regenerative, it also looks after people. And to me it's an example that we can do it if we want to. The Brits are very motivated by bird species diversity. Imagine if we applied that passion of ornithology to all aspects of our life, to all species. We'd create solutions so quickly. My experience of regenerating in an industrially farmed arable field into a forest garden is that for the first few years it was very, very difficult, and we had huge pest problems. But within a decade, that area of land became incredibly diverse, stable and pest-free. And the fruit and the trees and the shrubs and the wildlife absolutely flourished. So I know that we can restore the planet, and that I know that with our eyes on the future, we can make things better. We may be on the brink of deep crisis as a race, as the human race, but we have the capacity to restore, to adapt, to intelligently evolve. And I believe caring for the future is a vital aspect to that understanding. So for this reason I've been working with Hannah Apricot at the Abundant Earth Foundation. Some years ago we were able to set up the Permaculture Magazine prize, and very specifically a part of that that Hannah has pioneered is the Youth in Permaculture prize, YIP for short. And YIP is an annual prize that recognises the work of young permaculturists, pioneers in their teens and 20s who are really making a difference in the world, and gives a small financial gift to those people to encourage and to recognise their work and their dedication. And so we're doing this annually, and I'm delighted to say that this is now brought within the Lush Spring Prize and supported by Lush's resources and infrastructure, as is the Permaculture Magazine Prize in future years. So I want to just say something to end about determiners. We have the choice to learn the lessons of the past and to take responsibility for the future. We begin to shift our culture from destruction to regeneration when we do this. We become able to unify our inner desire for beauty, abundance and vitality with the conscious design of all our futures. We are then in beneficial relationship with all other species. We hold hope when we get to this place. We carry the child of tomorrow on our backs. We never waste anything. We celebrate the harvest. We learn that we can depend on Mother Earth, and we learn how to honour and give thanks for everything that she gives to us. We become beings not only of our past, not only of the present, but visionaries of the future. Thank you very much.